She didn't know his name. She didn't know his face. All she knew was that he owned 400 acres of land outside of Pincher Creek, Alberta, that he was 41 years old, and that he needed a wife by the end of the month or the bank would take everything he had ever worked for. Vera Sutton told herself that was enough. She had read the letter 3 times on the train from Toronto, folding and unfolding it until the creases went soft. Her sister thought she had lost her mind. Her mother had said nothing, which was somehow worse. But Vera had packed 2 bags, given up the lease on her apartment on Bloor Street, and boarded the westbound train with the particular calm of someone who had already made peace with a decision before she fully understood it. The ad had been placed in a small agricultural paper that she'd found on the seat beside her during a particularly bad week. The week her fiancé left, the week her position at the law firm was eliminated, the week she turned 32 and realized that the life she had been building so carefully was not, in fact, a life at all. It was just a sequence of acceptable choices. Rancher, widower, seeking a practical woman, no romance expected, partnership only, correspondence welcome, practical. She had always been called that. She could work with practical. His name was Dougal Hearn. He had written back to her within 4 days, a letter that was short and straightforward, and revealed almost nothing about him as a person, which she found either reassuring or alarming, depending on which hour of the day she read it. He had good land. He had cattle and a small horse operation. He had debt, which he disclosed plainly and without apology, the way a man might mention the weather. The bank in Pincher Creek had given him until the 1st of September to produce either full payment or proof of a stable 2-income household. The latter being the condition of a loan restructuring his financial advisor had apparently negotiated on his behalf. A wife in the cold arithmetic of rural banking counted as income stability. Vera was a paralegal with 12 years of experience and no current employment. In the cold arithmetic of her own life, a fresh start in southern Alberta counted as the only remaining option that didn't make her feel like she was disappearing. So here she was. The truck that picked her up at the Lethbridge airport was old and very clean. That detail stuck with her. The inside of the cab smelled like cedar and something mechanical she couldn't name, and everything was worn but carefully maintained. The seat covers, the dash, the rubber floor mat. A man who kept his truck clean in that particular way, she thought, was a man who understood the value of what he had. Dougal Hearn was not what she had expected. She had expected older, somehow, more weathered, the kind of man whose face told you everything about 30 years of hard seasons. Instead, he was lean and quietly built, with dark hair going silver at the temples and gray eyes that moved over her once, quickly, and then moved away. He shook her hand when she came through the arrival's door. His grip was firm and brief. "Vera Sutton," he said, "not a question." "That's me," she said. He took her largest bag without asking and put it in the truck bed. She carried the smaller one herself, and he didn't try to take that one, which she appreciated. They drove for over an hour, and he said almost nothing the entire way. Not rudely, he answered when she spoke, and once he pointed out a hawk sitting on a fence post and said, red-tailed, "They're everywhere out here." But he didn't fill the silence the way most people did, and she found herself relaxing into it in a way she hadn't expected. Outside the window, the land opened up into something enormous and pale gold, and the sky was so wide it felt like a different sky than the one she had grown up under, a bigger one, a sky that had more room in it. The ranch was called the Hearn Place. That was simply what it was called, no other name. The house was 2 stories, white with a green roof, with a long porch across the front, and a kitchen garden along the south side that looked like it hadn't been properly tended in some time. There was a red barn and several outbuildings, and a fence line that ran as far as she could see in either direction. Dougal showed her the house the way a man might show a prospective buyer, room by room, with brief descriptions. The kitchen had been updated sometime in the previous decade. The upstairs bathroom had pressure issues in the morning. The second bedroom was hers, and it had a good window facing east. "I put clean sheets on this morning," he said. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and left her to unpack. That first night she sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the silence, which wasn't really silence at all once you learned to hear it. There were cattle somewhere in the dark. There was wind against the windows. There was the sound of Dougal moving around in the kitchen below her, the soft knock of a pot being set down, water running. She pulled her knees up to her chest and thought, I am 32 years old and I have moved to a ranch in Alberta to marry a man I have never met, and I have absolutely no idea what I am doing." Then she thought, "Neither did I when I moved to Toronto at 22. And that turned out fine for a while." She slept better than she had in months. They were married on a Thursday at the municipal office in Pincher Creek, with 2 witnesses from the town, a woman named Bev, who worked at the office, and a retired farmer named Clyde, who seemed to be there by chance and was delighted to help. Bev cried a little. Dougal signed his name with the same careful attention he seemed to give everything, and Vera signed hers beside it, and that was that. He called her Vera. She called him Dougal. They drove back to the ranch in the clean truck, and she made pasta for dinner because she had found the ingredients and needed something to do with her hands. "It's good," he said. "It's just pasta," she said. Still good. They washed the dishes together and did not speak much, and went to their separate rooms at 9:30, and in the morning when she came downstairs he had already made coffee and left a cup on the counter for her, and it was the right strength, which she noticed. The days began to take shape around the work of the ranch. Vera had not grown up on a farm. She had grown up in Mississauga, in a house with a small yard, with a father who was an accountant and a mother who taught piano. She knew nothing about cattle or hay, or the machinery that filled the equipment shed like mechanical dinosaurs, but she had always been a fast learner, and she was not too proud to ask questions, and Dougal answered them all without impatience. She learned that the cattle were a mix of Angus and Hereford, a herd of 83. She learned that Dougal had 2 hired hands who came seasonally, brothers from Fort Macleod named Prescott and Lyle, but that he'd had to let them go the previous year when the finances tightened. She learned that the kitchen garden had been his wife's, that her name had been Ellen, and that she had died 4 years ago of a stroke at 38. He told her this last part standing at the fence one evening, looking out at the horses in the near pasture, and he said it the same way he said everything, plainly, without flourish. But she noticed that his hands tightened on the top rail and then loosened again. "I'm sorry," she said. "Yeah," he said. That was all. She started working on the kitchen garden the next day, not because she thought it would mean something to him, or because she was trying to be symbolic about it. She just thought it was a shame to let good soil go to waste. The trouble came from the east, which was the direction most trouble came from in her experience. From the city, from the past, from the people who believed distance was only physical. His name was Roland Finch, and he was the regional acquisitions manager for a land development company called Meridian Agricultural Properties, which was headquartered in Calgary, and which had been quietly buying up struggling ranch properties across the Pincher Creek and Clarisholm corridors for the past 18 months. He arrived on a Tuesday in a silver SUV with a company logo on the door, and he wore boots that had never seen actual mud. Vera was the one who saw him first. She was coming around the side of the barn with a feed bucket when the SUV pulled into the yard, and something about the way it parked, too precisely, too far from the mud, told her before she even saw his face that this was not a neighbor dropping by. "Morning," he said, getting out and smiling the particular smile of a man who had been told he was charming and had decided to weaponize it. "Is the owner around?" "Depends on what you need," she said. He introduced himself and handed her a card and said he was interested in having a conversation with Mr. Hearn about some opportunities that might be of interest, given the current agricultural market. He said it smoothly, pleasantly, and she noticed that he did not call it what it was, which was an offer to buy the land. She took the card and went to find Dougal. She found him in the equipment shed working on a piece of machinery she couldn't name. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at the card and said nothing for a moment. "I'll talk to him," he said. She watched from the kitchen window. The conversation was short. Dougal stood with his arms crossed and did not offer to shake hands at the end of it, and Roland Finch got back in his silver SUV and drove away looking only slightly less pleasant than he had arrived. When Dougal came back inside, she was at the table with coffee, and he sat down across from her. "He wants the land," she said. "He wants the land," Dougal agreed. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it wasn't for sale." She nodded. "What did he say?" Dougal was quiet for a moment. He said he'd be in touch. Said the market was difficult right now for small operations and that sometimes a kind offer was better than no options at all. He looked at the card where she'd set it on the table. He knew about the bank loan. That was the thing that worried her. Not the offer itself, That she understood. It was just business. It was just money. But the fact that he knew about the loan. That meant someone at the bank had been talking, or that Meridian had been researching the property carefully enough to know exactly where the vulnerability was. She picked up the card and turned it over. "I can look into this company," she said. "I have some contacts. I still know people in corporate law." Dougal looked at her. "I was a paralegal," she said. 12 years. Commercial and corporate mostly." Something shifted in his expression, too small to name. "That would be helpful," he said. That evening she was on her laptop for 4 hours. She found what she was looking for around midnight. Meridian Agricultural Properties was a subsidiary of a holding company called Alcott Resources, registered in Alberta, but with parent entities in Ontario and British Columbia. In the previous 18 months, Meridian had acquired 11 properties in the foothills region. Of those 11, 8 had been subject to bank pressure of some kind in the 18 months prior to acquisition. The pattern was clean and ugly. Identify financial stressed properties, apply additional pressure through back-channel bank relationships, acquire at depressed prices, hold for 5 years, redevelop or resell at a premium once the rural land corridor values increased. They weren't doing anything technically illegal, but they were doing something that she was not going to allow. She printed what she had, organized it into a document, and put it on the kitchen table with a note that said, "Read this when you have time," and went to bed. He read it before she came downstairs in the morning. She could tell because the pages were in a different order than she had left them, and his coffee cup was empty at 7 a.m., which meant he'd been up earlier than usual. "This is solid," he said when she came into the kitchen. "It's a start," she said. "Where did you find all of this?" "Public filings, mostly. Incorporation records. Some of it took some digging." She poured her coffee. "If we can show a pattern of coordinated bank pressure, that changes the picture legally. It might not be enough for criminal charges, but it's enough to make noise. Enough to get a journalist interested. Enough to make Meridian think twice about pressing forward if there's going to be scrutiny." He was looking at her, the way she had noticed him look at something he was trying to understand. Not distrust, but a careful attention, the kind you gave to a fence post that was holding more weight than you expected. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. The question surprised her. Not the asking of it, but the way he asked it, quiet, genuine, like he actually didn't know the answer. She thought about it honestly. "Because it's my name on that deed too," she said. "And because what they're doing is wrong." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said, "All right." The months that followed were hard in the specific way that honest work is hard. Not crushing, not dramatic, but relentless. Vera drove into Lethbridge twice to meet with a lawyer she had tracked down through her old professional network, a woman named Kathleen Dory, who specialized in agricultural property disputes and who was sharp enough to immediately see what Vera had put together. "This is good work," Kathleen said, flipping through the documents. "Thank you," Vera said. "What can we do with it?" "Potentially a great deal," Kathleen said. "But it will take time, and it will require the bank to be uncomfortable. And banks do not enjoy being uncomfortable." "Can you make them uncomfortable?" Kathleen smiled over her glasses. "I've made much larger institutions than the Bank of Pincher Creek very uncomfortable. Leave that part to me." Meanwhile, Vera had found her footing on the ranch. She had stopped apologizing for not knowing things and had simply started learning them. She could now drive the old John Deere in a straight enough line that Dougal had stopped watching from the fence when she worked the west field. She knew the name of every animal in the herd and had strong opinions about 3 of them. She had replanted the kitchen garden and coaxed it back from 3 seasons of neglect. And on an evening in late July, it had given them green beans and tomatoes and zucchini so large it embarrassed her. She and Dougal did not talk much, but they talked. In the evenings mostly, after dinner, sitting on the porch, while the sky changed color in the western direction that it changed color here, which was nothing like any sky she had known before. He told her about his father, who had built the Red Barn and died of a heart attack at 59. He told her about the winter 4 years before Ellen died, when they had lost 11 animals in 3 days to a respiratory illness that came out of nowhere and couldn't be stopped. He told her these things quietly, without looking for comfort, just setting them down like facts. She told him about the law firm, about her ex-fiancé, Marcus, who had told her she was too focused on work to be present, and then immediately moved in with a woman who worked 60 hours a week. She told him about her mother's face when she had called from the train platform. "Did she try to talk you out of it?" he asked. "She didn't say a word," Vera said. "Which is my mother's way of saying she thinks you've made a catastrophic mistake. And have you?" he asked. He was looking at the horizon. She thought about it. The real answer, not the polite one. "No," she said, "I really haven't." He nodded slowly, and that was how that conversation went. Roland Finch came back in August with a number. It was a fair number. Vera thought, privately, that it was actually a generous number, and that a different woman in a different situation might have taken it without a second thought. Dougal didn't move where he was sitting. "I told you in June," he said. "It's not for sale." Roland Finch said that circumstances changed. He said the market was unpredictable. He said that sometimes holding on was more expensive than letting go, and he said it with the practiced sympathy of a man who had said it many times before. "We're aware of the property's financial situation," he said. "Are you?" said Dougal. "The September deadline is coming up quickly." "We're aware of that too," said Vera. She was standing behind Dougal's shoulder, and Roland Finch's eyes moved to her with a flicker of reassessment. "Mrs. Hearn," he said pleasantly, "I understand you're new to the area. Sometimes a fresh perspective can be useful in these situations." "I'm finding it very useful," she said. "For example, I have a fresh perspective on Meridian's parent company, Alcott Resources, and their acquisition pattern across the Foothills corridor. I also have a fresh perspective on the relationship between Alcott's regional director and the loan officer banks in this area, who have moved 8 ranch properties into default in the past 18 months. She paused. "I shared that perspective with a journalist at the Calgary Herald last week, and with a lawyer who is, as we speak, preparing a detailed filing with the Alberta Securities Commission." Roland Finch was very still. "I'd encourage you to mention that to your people," she said, "before anyone makes any further decisions about this property." He left. He drove out of the yard more quickly than he had arrived, and the silver SUV kicked up dust on the gravel road, which she found satisfying. Dougal looked at her. "Securities Commission," he said. "Kathleen filed it on Monday," she said. "It might not lead anywhere, but it creates a paper trail and it changes the risk calculation for Meridian. They're not going to push hard on a property that's generating formal scrutiny." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're good at this." "I know," she said. "I used to do it for people who deserved it less." Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before. Not quite a smile, something adjacent to one. The bank called 2 weeks before September. It was not the loan officer. It was someone from a different department. A woman who was formal and careful in her language, and who said that in light of recent correspondence received by the branch regarding the restructuring agreement, the terms of the September deadline were under internal review, and they would be in touch with a revised timeline. Vera sat at the kitchen table after the call and did not move for a long time. Dougal came in from outside and read her face. "Good or bad?" he said. "Good," she said. "I think very good." He sat down across from her. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window the garden was still producing, the tomatoes going red and heavy on the vine. She could hear one of the horses moving in the near paddock, a rhythmic soft sound. "Vera," he said. She looked at him. "I know this wasn't what you expected," he said. "When you answered that ad, I know it wasn't. I know I'm not." He stopped. He looked at his hands on the table and then looked back at her with the directness that was, she had come to understand just how he was. Not coldness, honesty. "I want to say thank you. Not just for the legal work. For staying." She felt something shift in her chest, the quiet settling of something that had been suspended. "I didn't answer that ad because I expected something," she said. "I answered it because I needed something different. And this is different. Different good?" She looked around the kitchen. The curtains she had hung in June, the cast-iron pan on the stove that she had learned to use, the window above the sink that faced the barn and in the evenings caught the last of the light. "Yeah," she said. "Different good." The Securities Commission investigation opened formally in October. Kathleen Dory told Vera it would likely be slow and inconclusive, that these things almost always were, but that the filing had been picked up by the Herald journalist and then by 2 other regional papers, and that Meridian's regional director had quietly resigned in the first week of November. Roland Finch was transferred to a different territory. The bank offered a 5-year restructured loan at a rate that, as Vera pointed out to Dougal while going through the paperwork at the kitchen table one December evening, was actually better than the original terms by a meaningful margin. "They're managing their liability," she said. "Is that good for us?" he said. "It's very good for us," she said. He looked at the document. He was sitting close enough that she could see the specific way he read, moving through the lines carefully, not missing anything. She had noticed this about him from the beginning. He did not skim. He did not take shortcuts. It was the same quality in him that made him a careful rancher and an honest correspondent and a man who cleaned his truck without being told. "I'd like to hire the Prescott brothers back in the spring," he said. "Yes," she said. "We can do that." They had started saying we somewhere in the autumn naturally, without deciding to. By December, the kitchen garden was under snow and the herd was in the winter pasture, and the porch where they sat on summer evenings was too cold to sit on for long. But sometimes in the evenings she went out anyway, bundled up in a coat that had belonged to someone else. She'd found it on a hook by the back door and never asked whose it was, and stood looking at the sky above the dark line of the foothills to the west. The stars here were impossible. She had never seen stars like this in her life. There were too many of them. They made the sky feel inhabited. She heard the back door open behind her, and Dougal came out, 2 mugs in his hands. He handed her one and stood beside her. They were not touching. They were standing side by side looking at the same sky, which was something she had come to understand was its own kind of closeness. "Cold," he said. "Yes," she said. A long pause. "You're staying," he said. It was not quite a question. She looked at the stars for a moment. The herd was invisible in the dark pasture, but she could hear them, the low sound of them, a presence in the cold air, the red barn with its light on, the house behind them, warm and lit, with the curtains she had chosen. "I'm staying," she said. He didn't say anything. But he moved an inch closer, and the warmth of that inch in the cold night was something she would remember for the rest of her life on this land that was theirs now, fully and finally, with no one able to take it from them.